In a world of noise, bias, and spin, intelligence may be the only currency that matters. Welcome to This Week Explained. I'm Tiana, and as always, I am joined by 20-plus year intelligence veteran Kervin. We go behind the front lines to bring you the factual, actual intelligence that you need. No fluff, no agenda, because we value the truth and your time. Before we start, I want you to know this broadcast is powered by the Leon Media Network. From sports to education, find your next obsession, like Can We Please Talk? Or At Least You Heard It Here at leonmedianetwork.com. We are also caffeinated through those late nights of intelligence reporting by fresh roasted coffee. They've set up a special offer just for our listeners. To get the best deal, you must click the link in our show notes and enter the code THISWEEK. That's THISWEEK to get 20% off your first order. It's genuinely some of the best coffee you can buy, and you'll be supporting the show, so check that out. Now, are you guys ready for the real story? Let's get into the update. The geopolitical landscape of the Western Hemisphere has been reoriented in under 48 hours, leaving the polished language of diplomacy in the dust of a high-stakes extraction. While the world's attention was split between removing holiday decorations and European summits, the clinical precision of Operation Absolute Resolve shattered the status quo, proving that the distance between a criminal indictment and a federal cell is shorter than anyone imagined. The capture of Nicolás Maduro by elite U.S. operators is a cinematic reality that has fundamentally shredded existing rules of international sovereignty. By launching a regime decapitation strike while a high-level Chinese delegation was recently inside the presidential palace, Washington has issued a profound, unilateral statement to its global rivals. This is the modern reassertion of a sphere of influence, the Dunroe Doctrine, signaling that regardless of multipolar talk, the United States considers this neighborhood its own privileged ground. In the wake of the raid, Caracas has become a fractured glass caught in a volatile three-way tug-of-war for control. On one side, civilian loyalists led by Delcy Rodriguez attempt to project constitutional continuity. On the other, military hardliners like Diosdado Cabello are appearing on the streets in bulletproof vests, ready to coordinate armed resistance. Meanwhile, the Democratic opposition finds itself increasingly marginalized by the very power that claimed to be their liberator. It is a messy transition where stability is being weighed against democracy, and the oil fields are held by whoever can secure the refinery gates first. This massive pivot to the Western Hemisphere has created an immediate competition for diplomatic bandwidth, threatening to leave a vacuum in the delicate peace negotiations in Paris and the humanitarian purgatory of Gaza. In Tehran, the leadership reads the Caracas Extraction as a direct warning, a locked and loaded promise that the sovereignty line is no longer a shield for those on a U.S. indictment list. Even as Beijing tightens its iron walls around Taiwan through the Justice Mission 2025 blockade, the world is learning that the rules of the game have changed overnight. From the high-stakes gamble in the Caribbean to the systemic collapse of the Iranian economy, the maps of the old world are being redrawn in real time. In this episode, we examine the volatile space where a law enforcement exercise becomes a global pivot point and where the projection of raw strength may lead to a long peace or an era of unprecedented volatility. Okay, Kervin, obviously this was a busy weekend for the world and certainly a busy morning for both of us. I mean, I feel as though we spent more time looking at grainy operations footage in South America than I can remember in my lifetime. But before we get into the story of the week, I know you wanted to continue our trend of updates on Ukraine and Gaza.
Yeah, and it is difficult to look away when, another Panama conflict could be happening in your lifetime. So this is 2 for us now in our lifetime.
That's just the price of being a millennial.
Yeah. So...
Is it time for a nap yet? Because I'm ready for one. Well, okay, we should start with Kyiv. As always, President Zelensky hosted a high-level meeting with national security advisors from the Coalition of the Willing. This feels different from the previous summits. Usually we are talking about ammunition counts and frontline advances, but the reporting suggests this meeting was focused almost entirely on what happens after the shooting stops. So what is the strategic shift we are seeing here?
Yeah, and you're right. The tone has shifted, and we're moving from a crisis management phase into a stabilization framework phase. So the presence of representatives from the European Council and NATO in Kyiv that suggests that Western allies are no longer just looking at how to help Ukraine survive the winter, but how to integrate it into a permanent security architecture. So they're discussing a framework peace plan that is reportedly nearly complete. And the goal is to present a unified front at the Paris summit coming on January 6th.
Well, I noticed that the documents presented to the advisors include security guarantees. That has always been the most difficult point of negotiation. Is the West actually ready to provide a hard guarantee, or is this more about financial support?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it appears to be a tiered approach here. Now, the primary layer is a commitment to a modernized, technologically advanced Ukrainian military. But the more significant development is the discussion of a European led multinational force. This would not necessarily be a NATO mission, so that would avoid certain political tripwires against Russia there. But it would provide a physical presence on the ground to act as a deterrent to Russia. Now, the transition of leadership in Kyiv also reflects this, moving from a purely kinetic war footing to one focused on intelligence and technological deterrence. And this suggests that they are preparing for a long peace that is backed by high tech defense rather than just mass mobilization.
Well, while the focus is on Paris and Kyiv, we cannot ignore the situation in Gaza. It has been several months since the ceasefire began, but the word peace does not seem to fit the situation on the ground. You've described it as humanitarian purgatory. So, can you explain why the transition to a permanent cessation of hostilities has stalled?
Yeah, look, the ceasefire is currently in a state of what we'd call arrested development. We have moved through the initial phase of hostage and detainee exchanges, but right now we have reached a stalemate regarding what is called phase two. Now, the fundamental issue, as we've talked about for months now, is that yellow line, the internal boundary within the Gaza Strip where Israeli forces remain. So there's no consensus here on who's going to govern the territory once the military withdraws. Now, without a finalized plan for a reformed Palestinian Authority or an international oversight body, there is currently a governance vacuum.
It seems like a very dangerous equilibrium. If there is no governance, does that not just invite a return to the previous cycle of violence?
Yeah, you're exactly right. In the absence of a political solution, you have a population that is reliant on an aid system that is currently under immense strain due to recent legislative changes affecting UN agencies. So, if the day after plan remains a blank page, the ceasefire is not a bridge to peace. It is merely a pause in the conflict that remains fundamentally unresolved. Strategic patience right now is wearing thin on all sides, to be quite honest.
And now we have a new variable, the United States military operation in Venezuela, which we will be discussing later. I see this as a massive distraction for the State Department. So, how does a flare up in the Western Hemisphere impact these delicate negotiations in Europe and the Middle East?
Well, look, it creates a competition for bandwidth, right? Right. So we've seen that in real time. No longer are there protests for Palestinians. There are now protests for Venezuelans because we only have bandwidth for one conflict at a time. Now, the coalition of the willing in Ukraine is largely dependent on American diplomatic leadership. And if Washington is forced to pivot its primary attention to its own hemisphere, it's going to leave a vacuum in the Paris negotiations. This is going to leave a vacuum in the Gaza negotiations. Now, there is a risk that other actors may see this as an opportunity to push for more favorable terms while the primary mediator is occupied elsewhere, mainly Hamas, right? This is a test of whether the current international security architecture can handle two or now three, I would say, simultaneous crises.
It is a lot to process, and we will certainly be watching that Paris summit on the 6th very closely to see if the European leaders can maintain that momentum without being distracted by events in the Americas. Well, we have much more to cover regarding the domestic implications of these foreign engagements, but before we move on, I want to talk about something that we're all feeling, the sense that we're only getting half the story. It's so easy to get trapped in an algorithm that just tells us what we already want to hear. That's why we've integrated ground news into our daily routine. It's not just an app, it's a way to see your own blind spots. Their Vantage subscription is a game changer because it literally maps out the media landscape for you, showing which stories are being ignored by one side and amplified by the other. If you want to stop being a passive consumer and start seeing the full picture, you can get 40% off through our link in the show notes or our Instagram bio. It's the best way to support the show and sharpen your perspective at the same time. Leaving the diplomatic discussions and humanitarian purgatory behind, we are diving into a story that has completely reoriented the geopolitical landscape in the Western Hemisphere in under 48 hours. All right, Carvin, I feel like we've spent like the last 3 months talking about the buildup in the Caribbean, but I don't think anyone, except maybe you, truly expected the scale of what we saw on Saturday.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a lot to take in, Tiana, and for an analyst, the signs were there. You and I talked about this. You don't send the USS Gerald Ford. You don't send a carrier strike group into the Caribbean to bomb some dinghies in the Caribbean. To truly understand the gravity here, we got to start with the timeline, right? So at approximately 1 a.m. on Saturday, the United States launched Operation Absolute Resolve. This was not a small scale extraction. It involved 150 aircraft launched from 20 different bases, elite operators from CAG, which is Army Special Forces, moved on the presidential compound in Caracas, and they captured Nicolás Maduro. They also captured his wife. And then by Saturday night, they were being processed in a federal detention center in Brooklyn, New York.
I saw the thumbs up pictures.
Yeah. Do you
He's
see
like,
Nike? Nike's loving it right now.
no. Oh, because he was wearing Nike gear?
Yep. A Nike tracksuit. Yeah.
They're like, I love this for us. It definitely sounds like a movie script, but the reality is much more volatile. The White House is talking a lot about the oil and the narco terrorism indictments, but you have a different take on the primary driver behind this timing.
Yeah, I do. And we discussed this back in November. I actually went back and listened to that episode because I saw a ton of intelligence analysts from different or retired now. People like Andrew Bustamante, who's been on the podcast before. Ryan Macbeth has been on the podcast before. And as this happened, they started releasing uh, videos and like YouTube videos and commentary saying, "Oh, this is about China. This is about China." And I'm like, my guys, I've been talking about this for months. Tiana and I have been discussing this since early November. Like, yeah, this is about Beijing. So, how we know that? Look, we confirmed, not we, but media sources confirmed that a high level Chinese delegation, led by their special representative for Latin American affairs, was literally inside the palace meeting with Maduro just hours before the missiles started to fly. The U.S. knew this. Now, to launch a regime decapitation strike while a rival superpower's top diplomats are in the capital, that's a profound statement. That is the modern reassertion of the Donroe Doctrine. I've called it Donroe Doctrine 2.0. Trump is calling it the Dunroe Doctrine. I like mine better, but I'm biased. Now, it tells China that regardless of their investments or their diplomatic multipolar talk, the United States considers this hemisphere its own privileged sphere of influence where the U.S. will act unilaterally if pushed.
So it is less about the price of gas and more about who holds the keys to the neighborhood. But if the goal was to eliminate the leadership, we now have a two president problem again. The Venezuelan Supreme Court has already named Vice President Delcy Rodriguez as the interim leader, and they're calling this a forced absence and a criminal kidnapping.
Yeah, and so this is the what next that is going to keep all of us busy for the next few months. So by swearing in Rodriguez, the regime is attempting to prevent an institutional collapse. So they're trying to give the military a legal reason to remain loyal to the Bolivarian state rather than defecting to a US-backed transition. Now, the US claims they're going to run the country to get the oil flowing, but you cannot run an oil industry effectively if the local government, the courts, the military are actively resisting your presence. So, we are looking at a potential transition that looks more like an occupation in the short term.
And we have Brazil and other regional neighbors calling this an unacceptable line. It feels like the US has achieved its tactical goal, which is that Maduro is now in a cell, but the strategic stability of the region is more fragile than ever.
Yeah, and look, these are always the high stakes gambles. So, when these operations are successful, people can storm the streets of Caracas, they can storm the streets of Miami. And we've seen that, right? Venezuelans are celebrating an illegitimate leader coming to
Yes.
justice. And
Mhm.
sorry, you were going to say something.
I just said yes. That's all I said. How was
Okay.
affirming like you said?
Okay. I just thought I didn't know if you had more to say. So, and I know I said illegitimate leader, and some people might wonder, well, how do you know he's an illegitimate leader? Well, in 2024, there was an election. I was in, so you know this, T, and I was in Las Vegas during that election doing some work with the SEER specialists there. And I remember going to sleep seeing that the opposition had won overwhelmingly, almost 70% of the vote. When I woke up the next day, Maduro had won by 60% of the vote. That's questionable at best, right? He is an illegitimate leader. He was not duly elected. The people of Venezuela were not able to elect him. So the U.S. now has successfully projected strength to its global rivals. That's China, Russia, Iran. The problem, though, is this has also shredded the existing rules of international sovereignty. The indicator that I would say to watch for now is how the Venezuelan military responds to Rodriguez's orders. So if they dig in, the law of enforcement exercise becomes a protracted conflict.
It's a new world. We will have to see if the strength the secretary spoke about leads to peace or more volatility because as of now, there is no clear exit ramp. Even if the United States manages to hold the physical territory around the oil fields, the political landscape inside Caracas is becoming what you called a fractured glass. Right now, we have a government that is essentially splitting into factions in real time. So, who are the primary players vying for control now that the center of the regime is gone?
Right. So you have to look at this through three distinct lenses. First, you have the civilian Chavistas, that's led by Delcy Rodriguez. She has the Supreme Court behind her, and she is attempting to project a sense of constitutional order. No, she's a pragmatist. She has deep ties to international financiers, and she even has the ear of some circles in Washington. She's the face of the continuity faction. They want to prove that the movement Hugo Chavez started, that is bigger than just one man.
But a government is only as strong as the people holding the rifles. So that brings us to the second faction, which feels much more volatile.
Yeah, you're absolutely right to bring that up. And then what you're alluding to here is the hardliner or the security faction. It's centered around Diosdado Cabello, and also the defense minister Vladimir Padrino Lopez. No, look, Cabello is often seen as the muscle of the regime. He controls the internal security apparatus and has deep influence over the colectivos. These are pro government civilian militias on the ground. Now, while Rodriguez is speaking to the courts, Cabello is appearing on the streets in a bulletproof vest. So, if there's going to be an armed resistance or a counterinsurgency against the U.S. presence, it's likely going to be coordinated by his group. Now, they have the most to lose if a U.S. backed transition takes hold, as many of them also face significant international indictments.
And then we have the opposition. We have Maria Corina Machado, who recently won the Nobel Peace Prize and is seen by millions as the rightful leader after the 2024 elections. However, the president has made some very specific comments about her not having the respect to run the country right now. That seems like a massive disconnect between the US and the very people who have been fighting for democracy there.
Yeah, look, President Trump is not one to keep his opinions to himself. So it seems as though the United States uh, appears to be skeptical of the traditional opposition's ability to manage the military or the state bureaucracy, to be honest, during this chaotic window. And there is chaos right now. Now, by sidelining Machado, the administration might be trying to find deals with figures, even figures like Rodriguez, or even elements of the military to ensure a smoother transition. Now, this is something we would call stability over democracy. Why would you deal with someone who you would consider loyal to Maduro? They might be an enemy. Well, we're going to choose stability in this case. Now, the U.S. wants a government that can secure the oil and maintain order, and they may be willing to work with light versions of the current regime to get it.
So, we are potentially looking at a three-way tug-of-war between the civilian loyalists, the military hardliners, and an opposition that feels increasingly marginalized by the very power that claimed to be liberating them.
And it's a recipe for a very messy transition. And it's also why forced regime change rarely works, in my opinion. If these factions do not find a way to coexist or negotiate, the vacuum left by Maduro will be filled by whoever can hold the street corner or the refinery gate the longest. Now, the real indicator will be whether we see a National Unity Council emerge or if Caracas descends into a localized power struggle between all of these groups.
The clock is ticking as the world watches those New York courtrooms. So, Kervin, before we move on, we have to look further afield. Venezuela has spent the last decade building a very specific set of alliances to insulate itself from U.S. pressure. Chief among them is Iran. We saw Iranian state media among the first to broadcast the footage of the strikes in Caracas. So how is Tehran reading all of this?
Yeah, I mean, this is a direct warning to Tehran. Just 24 hours before the strikes in Venezuela, President Trump issued a Truth Social post warning the Iranian government that the United States was locked and loaded to intervene if they used lethal force against domestic protesters in their own country. Then, almost immediately, a high-value extraction is executed in Caracas. For the leadership in Tehran, this is no longer about rhetoric. They are seeing a United States that is willing to cross the sovereignty line to remove a head of state they have labeled a criminal.
It has to be a jarring realization because, for years, Venezuela served as a strategic hub for Iran in the Western Hemisphere, a place for their shadow fleet to move oil and for groups like Hezbollah to establish a logistical foothold. If that safe harbor is now under U.S. administrative control, what happens to all of those assets? We'll probably just take them like we took the oil.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the question, right? The U.S. will just take them. And we have seen reports of several hundred Hezbollah operatives relocating to Venezuela in recent years, specifically around places like Margarita Island. Now, if the U.S. is truly going to run the country, they are not just taking over oil wells. They are inheriting a landscape with deeply embedded Iranian intelligence and paramilitary footprints. Now, Tehran has already denounced the operation as American thuggery, so has a bunch of other countries. I would say the majority of countries have said this. They say it's a violation of the UN Charter. They are essentially calling on the international community to recognize that the rules of the game have changed.
And they've changed to there are no rules. We can do what we want.
Yeah, bold statement by Russia to say that the U.S. subverted some rules that Russia has never subverted.
Yeah, there aren't rules. That's all I'm learning. I saw some meme, I think, on Instagram that said, now that I see that international law doesn't mean anything, I want a refund from GWU. Or something along those lines.
Yeah, no, look, if we could just be frank for just a little bit, I think that what we're seeing here is, so after the world wars, right, 1 and 2, there was sort of this consensus that we can't let this happen again, that we can't just have countries reshaping borders as they will, as they will,
As they
um,
want,
as they
when they
want.
want.
Yeah. And I think that's changing because we are getting, and you know this, you know my opinion on this, we are getting very close to a third world war. And it has nothing to do with strikes in Iran or Nigeria or things like that. It has everything to do with this great power conflict. So Russia starts with invading Ukraine, and then pieces start to, so the dominoes start to fall. And we are in the middle of dominoes falling right now, and this is another one that I say that just to tell everyone to please be prepared. It is coming, not to bring a downer onto everything.
Thank you for that downer that you brought onto everything. Now let's continue. So, do we think we see a retaliatory move? Iran has a history of responding to U.S. pressure in the Middle East when they feel squeezed in other theaters.
Yeah, like I think right now, Iran is dealing with their own struggles. We're going to discuss that probably very soon, within the next 30 seconds, probably. But if they feel they have lost a major ally in the Americas, they may look to increase the cost of U.S. operations in the Strait of Hormuz or against U.S. bases in Iraq and Syria. Now, there is also the deterrence factor. If they believe the administration is genuinely locked and loaded for a similar operation in Tehran, we might actually see a temporary, albeit tense, period of restraint while they reassess their own internal security.
Maduro's capture is the move everyone is talking about today, but the counter moves in the Middle East might be what we are talking about next week. The world just got a lot smaller for anyone on a U.S. indictment list. This is a perfect segue into our next topic because it feels as if something fundamental has shifted in Iran over the last week. Are we seeing just another wave of unrest, or are we looking at a legitimate breaking point for the Islamic Republic?
Once again, excellent question there. And we often see protests in Iran that are driven by social issues or specific political grievances, like the 2022 movement that we discussed for a few months. But what we are witnessing right now is a systemic collapse of the economic floor. And when the Iranian rial hit 1.45 million to a single United States dollar, it was not just a number on a screen. It represented the total evaporation of the life savings of the middle class. The bazaar, which is the marketplace, that has historically been the economic heart and political kingmaker in Iran, and it has effectively shuttered its doors. So when the merchants stop trading, it is because the currency has become a liability rather than a tool for commerce.
That is a staggering figure. 1.45 million to 1. I remember when we thought it was bad a few years ago, but beyond the numbers, the slogans caught my ear. People are not just asking for lower prices, they are chanting for the return of the monarchy and calling for the end of the supreme leader's rule. So, why is the ghost of the Shah appearing now of all times?
Yeah, it's completely fascinating, Tiana. Now, for the younger generation, Gen Z, even younger, even us, the 1979 revolution is ancient history. They do not have the same ideological baggage as their parents. To them, the current regime represents 45 years of isolation and economic decline. It's by chanting for the son of the late Shah, Reza Pahlavi. They are not necessarily advocating for the return to 1978. They are using it as a symbol for a secular, nationalist Iran that is connected to the rest of the world. This is the ultimate rejection of the current clerical identity. Reza Pahlavi, his recent statements from exile have only added fuel to the fire, especially as he frames this as a just cause that has finally united the country of Iran.
It sounds like the regime is being squeezed from every side, and it is not just domestic, is it? We have the shadow of the 12-day war from last June hanging over everything. So how much of this current crisis is a direct hangover from those airstrikes on the nuclear sites?
Yeah, I do think it's a massive factor in all of this. The 12-day conflict in June did more than just damage physical infrastructure, it shattered the illusion of Iranian deterrence. So when the United States and Israel successfully targeted those enrichment sites, they also drained the Iranian treasury. War is expensive. Rebuilding nuclear facilities is even more expensive. The government is trying to prioritize its axis of resistance and its military survival while its citizens cannot afford bread. That is why the president's attempt to swap out the central bank governor felt so hollow. Bringing back Abdul Nasser Hamati, a man who was already impeached for failing to manage the currency. It is essentially a desperate move to show they are trying to do something, even if that something has already failed in the past.
You mentioned the government's response. I found the cold weather holiday quite transparent. They shut down the entire country's infrastructure, claiming they needed to save energy because it was too cold. Is anyone actually buying that?
No, not in the slightest. Actually, check the temperatures on this. It was in the mid 30s, which is kind of cold, right? For us from Louisiana, I would consider it cold. It's 15
Yeah.
degrees here where I am. And if I didn't have my heat, I would not be happy. But the Iranian people are very savvy when it comes to state tactics. They recognize that a quote unquote bank holiday is just a way to stop people from organizing. So if the universities are closed and the banks are shut, the logistical nodes for a revolution are harder to maintain. So we're also seeing significant internet disruptions. That always happens because of national security, right? And data shows that traffic volume dropped by 35% on the internet recently. This is a standard part of the Iron Fist playbook in Iran. They slow down the world's view of the violence so they can act with more freedom.
And then there is the external pressure. President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu just met in Florida. The rhetoric coming out of that meeting was incredibly blunt. We talked about how Trump mentioned that he is locked and loaded and hinted at more strikes if Iran tries to rebuild those missile programs. So does that help the protesters, or does it give the regime an excuse to call them foreign agents?
Well, you're not going to like my answer, but it really is true that
No,
yes, it is, Tiana.
no,
Um,
no, don't you dare. Don't you dare.
Two
Just
things
kidding.
are true at the same time. I know. I know. I like that you play along with it there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fine.
But yeah, it is. Two things are true at the same time. On one hand, this does embolden the protesters to know they have the eyes of the world's most powerful military on them. Now, on the other hand, Ayatollah Khomeini is already using it. He has explicitly stated that the enemy wants to create sedition. The regime's survival strategy depends on convincing the public that these protests, they are not organic. These are a foreign plot rather than a domestic failure. But when you have a young man shot in Qom or deaths in Lordagan, it becomes very difficult to convince a grieving mother that her son was not her son, but a foreign spy. Now, the emotional weight of the casualties is starting to outweigh the regime's propaganda.
Well, as we look at the next few days, what are you watching for? Is this, I mean, if this is not just another protest, then what is the tipping point that we should be looking for?
All right, so there are two things here. First, the oil sector. If the workers at the refineries in the south of Iran walk off the job, the regime's revenue stream dies. It's the one thing that cannot survive. The second thing is we are looking for signs of fragmentation within the security forces. The Revolutionary Guards are loyal, but the regular police and the conscripts, they are often just young men from these same struggling families. So if they refuse to fire on the crowds, the regime loses its ability to enforce its will. We have seen verified videos of cars on fire and running battles, and that suggests a level of aggression that is very hard for a tired police force to maintain indefinitely.
It feels as if we are watching the final pages of a very long chapter in history. I suppose we'll have to see if the decisive response the prosecutor general promised actually materializes, or if the momentum is shifted too far to be stopped. The next 72 hours will be the most telling. If the protesters survive the current crackdown, we are entering uncharted territory for the region. I now want to pivot to the Indo-Pacific. We have been watching the reports coming out of the Taiwan Strait regarding the People's Republic of China and their latest exercise called Justice Mission 2025. Sorry, that
I
name.
didn't get that. I
is-
didn't see that movie. Is there
You
is
didn't
there a
see it?
preview?
That's not. I haven't seen that movie either. I don't think I
Yeah.
want to see that movie. But
We
this
know it's coming and we don't want to see it.
This was the second major blockade simulation just this year, and it feels as though the frequency is increasing, but what is actually changing on the water?
Yeah, look, so honestly, you're right. The tempo has certainly shifted since the inauguration in May of 2024. What we saw now in late December, that was not just another drill. U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, they were on high alert. And that was because this was a refined rehearsal of isolation. So the People's Liberation Army, or the PLA, is moving away from broad shows of force and toward very specific key point blockade maneuvers. So why is that important? That means they are getting close to making the decision to do what we have been talking about them doing for a couple of years now. They are identifying what they consider to be the centers of gravity for the island of Taiwan, and they are concentrating their assets there to demonstrate they can sever its connection to the rest of the world at will.
When we talk about severing connections, the messaging from Beijing was quite blunt this time. They released imagery that was visually aggressive. I believe one showed a noose tightening and another showed a chain wrapping around the island. I mean, it seems they are trying to win a psychological war before a single shot is even fired.
You're absolutely right. That's the art of war, right? And it's a dual track strategy. On one hand, you have the physical military pressure intended to demoralize the population and the leadership. On the other, they are using these exercises to frame any movement towards sovereignty as a provocation that justifies further escalation. Think what Russia did with Ukraine. Now, by doing this, they attempt to delegitimize the government in Taipei while making the prospect of resistance seem futile to the average citizen.
One of the things that caught my eye in the reporting was the heavy involvement of the China Coast Guard. We usually think of blockades as a purely naval affair with warships and submarines, so why bring the Coast Guard into a high stakes military exercise?
And it is one of the most significant takeaways from Justice Mission 2025. Now, by using the Coast Guard to interdict civilian and commercial vessels, Beijing creates a veneer of legitimacy. They frame these actions as domestic law enforcement rather than military aggression, and it's a clever way to complicate the response for other countries, i.e., the United States. So, if this is a police matter, it becomes much harder for foreign powers to justify a military intervention without appearing to escalate the situation themselves.
That almost sounds like what we did in Venezuela. We said it was a
Shh.
police matter.
It was a police matter. The DEA was there.
Nice. Which is a federal agency, but okay. But anyway, so I mean, it it's almost like they're trying to change the rules of the game while they are playing it, which also sounds like us currently, but
Right. You know,
yeah.
you're saying a lot of this stuff, and I don't know if
Mhm.
you're trying to get me to disagree with you so we can have a debate over this.
Okay.
But I thought about this a lot over the weekend. If you don't mind me talking about this for just a minute, um, I thought about it a lot. I was like, so what happens when China makes a move for Taiwan and deposes the president of Taiwan and goes, well, how is that any different from what the US did? And they would say it's not different.
Right.
It's actually Taiwan to China is a part of China. So they would say, actually, we are more benevolent because we actually didn't invade a sovereign country in their thoughts and do this. We actually are protecting, this is national security because we are protecting our own borders, Taiwan being those borders. So I did think a lot about that and how this move as a move of deterrence towards China could cause China to make a move earlier. We could have a whole podcast on that later, but those are just some of my thoughts.
Well, I mean, since there are no rules, why not make a move earlier?
Right, and then you get what you can
Rules
then
means nothing, paper means nothing, everything means
paper
nothing.
one of our best episodes, the paper means nothing. Go
Paper
back,
means nothing.
check out the paper means nothing. But you can actually project to not maybe not US allies, but those on the fence allegiances like India, like Thailand, Cambodia, and you can say, "Hey, this is no different than what the US did to Venezuela." Actually, it is different than what the US did to Venezuela because this is part of our own borders. This is an internal conflict. Stay out of it. So you are absolutely right. I just thought I'd put that out there.
I don't even know what I said in order to spur this little sidebar, but I like it. I don't
Well, no, you said just like the US did. And so I
Yeah,
just wanted to reiterate some of the thoughts that I had as I was
researching.
watching this unfold. Yeah.
Yeah.
Unfold.
Well, um, so while the Coast Guard is handling the law enforcement side, the Navy was practicing some very heavy hitting scenarios. They were simulating anti submarine warfare and even decapitation strikes, which, guess what? We
Oh.
just did one of those too, y'all.
Oh. Yeah, you
Huh.
bring we just talked about that, right? Yeah, and you're
Hmm.
absolutely right. So is China going to be looking at what the US did and said, "Oh, smart move. Let's do some of those things." It's possible. For this exercise though, for the very first time we saw a Type 075 landing helicopter. It's a landing helicopter dock. And it's a dual use military civilian, and it was involved in one of these specific drills. And this is an amphibious assault ship. It tells us they are practicing how to rapidly transition from a blockade. Blockade is about stopping things from going in to an invasion, which is about putting boots on the ground. They also fired long range rockets into the waters surrounding major port cities. And this is a clear signal that they can reach any point on the island of Taiwan, with precision strikes.
And yet, we saw a very interesting split in the international reaction. The United States State Department called the drills unnecessarily provocative, but then you had President Trump appearing to downplay the threat, saying he was not concerned and noting that these types of exercises have been going on for 20 years. That's a lot of conflicting noise for leadership to be sifting through.
Yeah, and again, right, two things can be true at the same time. It is unnecessarily provocative, and it is these types of exercises have been going on for 20 years, but the these types of exercises, correct, yeah, they have been going on for 20 years, but the way it was carried out shows us that we are closer than ever before to the conflict. And so these two messages is a challenge for intelligence and policy planners. While the political rhetoric might vary, the data on the water shows a clear trajectory. These exercises are moving closer to the coast of Taiwan than ever before. They're breaching buffer zones that were previously respected, and every iteration allows the PLA to refine its integrated joint operations. The PLA is building a comprehensive firepower strike complex designed to eliminate military infrastructure before a single transport ship even leaves the mainland.
It is a sobering look at how the geography of the region could possibly be reshaped by all of these maneuvers. And it's not just about Taiwan, it's about how the PRC views the entire first island chain and their ability to keep external forces at bay. It is about signaling to the United States and Japan that the cost of intervention would be iron walls. So, as the noose, to use their term, continues to tighten, we will have to see if the international community changes its posture in response. So, before we sign off, is there anything else you'd like to discuss?
No, I think we talked enough today.
All right. Thank you so much for listening to This Week Explained. We hope that you found it informative and engaging. If you have any feedback or suggestions for future episodes, we would love to hear from you. For more in-depth coverage of these stories and more, be sure to follow us on social media at This Week Explained.
Tiana, thank you so much. And until next week, stay safe out there.